5:31 p.m. I was sitting at 13 minutes past 7 o'clock. Well, on the 24th of February, Russia's President Vladimir Putin ordered a large-scale military attack on Ukraine, a European democracy of 44 million people. Now, this invasion continues to unfold, with Putin ordering a wide range of attacks hitting multiple cities and bases with airstrikes or shelling. This is resulting in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians seeking refuge in neighboring countries, and of course the deaths of civilians and soldiers. Now, to have a Talanoa and a breakdown of why this is happening, we're joined now by Massey University Defence and Security Studies Professor Rouben Azizian, an expert on geopolitics, national security strategy, of course even Russian politics and policy. With that, I say Malolele and welcome to the show this morning.
Thank you very much, Aggie. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Rouben. I would love, though, if you could just basically maybe give us a breakdown or even the latest updates with Russia's invasion on Ukraine. I suppose maybe even including a little bit of the death toll and where they've attacked so far.
Right. Well, the very latest and the very alarming, actually, is that Putin has put his strategic forces at the alarm level. Strategic means nuclear. And so this is terrifying to hear this kind of developments. In terms of losses and deaths, the Ukrainians have announced their losses. I think of yesterday, they were talking about 150, 200 people who have died, both military and civilian. The Russian government doesn't tell anything about losses, which is unfortunately typical, because this is one of the major differences, right? Ukraine is a democracy, or at least a democratizing country. We have to be very careful about defining countries' democratic status, because Ukraine is a new democracy, is an evolving democracy, and is a democracy that is new, at a country that is new to democracy. Obviously, there have been some mistakes done by Ukrainian government, both internally and in foreign policy, perhaps. But there is no justification for an attack by a country which is led by an authoritarian leader who looks like has lost his mind, I have to say. I mean, a week ago, I would have never predicted a full-scale invasion, because there were talks, American intelligence was talking about, invasion. I couldn't believe Putin, who is a person who I thought has his own logic and his own rationale, would do something that is absolutely a madness for his own country. And back to the losses again, some estimates from UK sources are, in the first day alone, Russia lost 450 people, soldiers, mostly young soldiers who are sent to war, totally brainwashed. And I'm sure they really don't still understand why are they in a foreign country and what are they doing there.
Can I ask though, Rouben, and I'm sure many people are asking just this one question. Why? Why is Russia invading Ukraine? And as for yourself, as part of the Russian diaspora, what are your immediate thoughts about this? I know you've just touched on it briefly, saying it just seems a little bit mad at the moment, right? His views of Putin. But why is he invading the Ukraine?
Right. But, yeah, he is mad at the moment. That looks like that. Or absolutely angry, bitter, frustrated man. And this could maybe, as terrifying as it sounds, hopefully lead to more and more people in Russia starting to question their own leader. Because if he didn't invade Ukraine, there was still the Russian public, and I don't know about Russian community in New Zealand, but I would guess there are some Russians in the community who thought that Putin was a strong leader and Russia deserves a strong leader, and they were supportive of him. At least I have come across some. But Russian diaspora is very divided, and Russia is also divided by those who think that Putin is an authoritarian leader and anti-democratic and pushing Russia back in its foreign policy and domestic developments. And there are others who think that we need a tough leader like that, who have very strong feelings, negative feelings about the West, and I can touch about that as well. Some of those feelings are perhaps justified because I believe the West has at times been a little bit arrogant dealing with Russia before. So, so this now invasion of Ukraine, even people who had faith and trust in Putin, I think are going to lose it, especially if they see deaths, if they see hear lies about the death. And I think, and some are suggesting that this could be the wake-up call for even the Russians who believed in Putin, and it could be potentially end of his political career. But he's a stubborn man. He's not going to quit just like that, I think. So we are into a very challenging internal and foreign policy, developments.
Thank you for that, Rouben. I do want to ask, of course, Ukraine there are people who are there standing and wanting to defend their country. Is there defense forces, though, or resources that they have enough to fight against, obviously, Russia at the moment?
It looks like they have been, relatively successful so far. I think that's one of maybe the shocks to the Putin's government, that they thought, or they were told, this is the thing, in countries where you have one leader running the country for 20 years and everyone around him is a yes person, oftentimes, as someone said very, one of the commentators, Putin lives in a parallel world. He hears only what he likes to hear, and his inner circle tell him that this is going to happen. So he thought that because there are Ukraine, and that is one of the reasons for current tensions as well. Let me walk you back a little bit. When the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, Ukraine was one of the first of the 15 republics who decided to go independent. There were others who already done that, the Baltic states, but Ukraine doing that was a major shock to Soviet leadership, including Gorbachev, who was a democratic leader who made a difference and is widely respected as someone who really ended the communist era in Soviet Union. So losing Ukraine psychologically for many Russians was a disaster, because Russians and Ukrainians are very close culturally. They're Slavic people. They speak very similar, languages, very easy to understand each other. So that was kind of a shock. And then Ukraine was always torn between various foreign interests. The Russians, the Polish, they were fighting with each other. They're conquering Ukraine. So as a result, Western Ukraine is much more westernized. In terms of religion, it's more of a Catholic. And Eastern Ukraine is much more pro-Russian or Russian-speaking. And there is a large population of Russians in Ukraine, and even larger population of people who speak Russian better than their own Ukrainian language. This is part of what happened in the Soviet Union, where Russian was the major language, a major republic, and influenced. So when Ukraine became independent, there was a natural desire by Ukrainians to promote their own culture and their own identity and de-Russify Ukraine. Now, that's understandable, but of course, it's important to do it in such a way that it doesn't hurt the feelings of the minorities. And you know that all over the world, we have this problem, how to deal in the interests of majority, but not to hurt the positions and the feelings of the minority. And by the way,
can I ask you
sure.
there? Sorry, Rouben.
Yeah, please.
With the minorities, geographically we are separated, right? New Zealand, even the Pacific nations, and I think that's where my question sort of lies: is what are the implications that this attack on the other side of the world will have on our Pacific region?
Right. Well, there could be some, implication in terms of how we actually start looking at this relationship between majority and minority. What does democracy do? How does democracy behave?
Right.
How do we avoid racism, which has been apparent? There are some Ukrainians who were very anti-Russian, almost wanting Russians out of Ukraine, but there are also in Russia people who look down at Ukrainians and think that Ukrainians are not even an autonomous nation or language in their own right. So one of the implications for the Pacific region is going to be that Russia has recognized two regions in Ukraine, eastern part, that have been pro-Russian and have been wanting independence from Ukraine. And so the whole problem started from there. In 2014, when a Ukrainian leader was toppled, and he was a pro-Moscow leader by the people, Putin and Russians said, this is a coup. This shouldn't have happened. This was done because the West was behind that. And as a punishment, Russia took over Crimea and started, which is part of Ukraine, and started to support these separatist movements. Now we have two newly independent countries, which are recognized by Russia only, I think. So what is going to happen soon, as it happened before, was there will be pressure on Pacific Island nations to recognize these two republics of Luhansk and Donetsk as independent nations. And in the past, some of our Pacific Island nations have succumbed to pressure. The way, China, Taiwan are trying to influence. Russia and Georgia were doing the same about some breakaway regions of Georgia that were trying to, be recognized. So I think we will see that. But honestly, Egi, right now, I thought that if you asked me like a week ago, I would say this is probably to be one of the major implications for our part of the world. That this can happen. The second implication could be that if Ukraine doesn't get enough support from the West, Ukraine may decide eventually to go nuclear. Because
which leads me to that question, though, Rouben. You've got world leaders who are, obviously condemning what Putin is doing, but then we're also seeing, I suppose, the call from Ukraine. I mean, there's no country that's sort of sending in military or defense forces to help defend Ukraine. What are your thoughts on that, though?
Yeah, well, because no one wants to start a third world war, because Putin has made very clear, he said that if any third party dares to interfere, the implications were very severe, hinting at nuclear force. And the way he has put his nuclear force on alert means that I'll use nuclear force. Now, I mean, I can't even call that madness. It's probably something, we can't even define if he decides to push the nuclear button. And everyone I'm talking to said, oh, no way, he's not going to do that. I said, you know what? Last week, I didn't think that he would invade Ukraine. But today, I will, I won't comment on that because anything can happen. And this is why actually Zelensky, the president, I think appealed to the international community, asked people, volunteers, from different parts of the world who cares about Ukraine to come and help out. So the West supplies equipment and weapons, but in terms of the military force, comparing the two, something you asked earlier, but I keep talking as I'm a professor, need to justify that. Ukrainian defense force was extremely weak in 2014, and that's why they couldn't fight back when Russia basically took over Crimea and supported separatists. But now they are much stronger. So I think their numbers are about 200,000 troops in Ukraine. But of course, Russia has at least 800,000, has much more advanced weaponry. And more money. Russia is sitting on oil and gas, and so the two are not equals. So what is probably helping Ukraine is that they're much more motivated to fight because they're fighting for their own land, and they are not a group of druggies and pro-Western, gangsters, the way Moscow presents them. They, as I said, there are different politicians in Ukraine. There are people who are maybe also a bit ultra-right, a bit too nationalistic, but they are not the majority. The majority of Ukrainians want to live their own life in peace and in friendship with Russia. And this is a big tragedy for these two countries, fighting with each other.
Sorry, we obviously the time is upon us, Rouben, and obviously
Right.
we need to wrap up now. But like you said, obviously you're hoping that this will end in a peaceful, diplomatic way. But just maybe a key or final message from you, though. What is the best thing, though, even from the other side of the world, that New Zealand can do to possibly help the Ukraine during this chaotic time?
Right. Before that, if I may, I just say we're talking about diaspora, and I'm already hearing from some of my Russian friends here that their kids are uncomfortable going to school because they're being sometimes even bullied. So what I want to say that the Russians who live in Russia and or outside Russia are not necessarily supporting Putin or supporting invasion. And so we have to be very understanding of that. It's a difficult, challenging time for everyone, for the Ukrainians, absolutely, whose families are there at high risk, but also for Russians who also may have families with soldiers in the battle and who feel, many of them feel ashamed that their own country is doing that. What New Zealand can do? Well, New Zealand has already spoken for diplomacy. I think it's important generally. I feel that New Zealand can be a little more proactive internationally in trying to facilitate between all these competing forces, because we're talking Russia and Ukraine today and the US behind, but there's also China. There's China-US tension that can also, unfold in a very dangerous way. I mean, Chinese are watching this to see what the West will do, possibly, if they decide one day to take over Taiwan. So we as New Zealand need to be very firm here that using force is absolutely unacceptable, but also probably do something more. As a respected country and a prime minister who is a star, I think our prime minister has a star status in many countries today.
So then do you believe then
we should start some kind of a process, a dialogue that, we have absolutely to rule out a use of force. We should, peacefully talk about problems. So I think New Zealand can have a stronger voice. I know we are all in this, turmoil with COVID and all of that, but this is what New Zealand can do. We can't sanction much Russian government. We don't have that kind of influence in Russia, but we can speak, a very strong message of peace and dialogue, because when it's United States and Russia talking, there's always a suspicion that, oh yeah, US has its own geopolitical interests. That's what they're doing, and they are also partly the problem for this because they are trying to influence Ukraine and all that. But when countries like New Zealand speak, I think there is more trust and understanding that we are not after any geopolitical influence. We just care about people, and we care about peace and friendship.
Absolutely. Hey, look, Rouben, what an amazing talk this morning. Really appreciate your insight into a lot of this. So we thank you for your time this morning. Hopefully we can catch up and continue this Talanoa too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eggy.
That is all right.
Thank you. Bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Goodbye, Paige, also. Bye.
Thank you.